Hello everybody, let's continue our qualitative data analysis journey. So at this point, you have cleaned and organized all of your codes. You have categorized and started to analyze each code separately. You have looked for disconfirming examples. You have started to look for codes related to other codes. And now we're going to start identifying themes. And that right there is the question. What the heck is a theme? This is something that I promise, trust the process. It will emerge from your data. You don't go in knowing your themes. These are things that you just figure out throughout the coding and analysis process. So the quick, easy answer is a code is an organized idea of meaning making that has happened from your data. So I want you to pause the video and I want you to read Saldana's definition. So pause the video, read this. And then here's some examples that Saldana gives. So if we were looking at a study of what it means to belong, these are three themes that might come up. So belonging is knowing the details of a culture. And then we could break that down into all the ways that it means to belong. Belonging means feeling grounded, and we could back that up with all of the codes and datas and categories. Or you can belong somewhere without actually being there. So these are the big things that came up from the data that help make meaning to answer the research question. And don't forget your research question when it comes to making themes. So themes are the bigger ideas. So we've gone from our raw data, all of those transcripts, to all of our codes. Some of these codes might not go to anything else. Some of these codes might be a whole category. Some of these codes might be an entire theme, depending on the importance and how much you ended up coding within that. But generally, these codes kind of start to group into bigger ideas, and then these bigger ideas lead to this even bigger idea that we end up calling a theme. So the easiest way for me to explain this is to give you some examples. Let's start with my skate club. You've seen this table in the readings for this week, so this shouldn't be a new way to organize it for you. This is a super helpful way for a reader to understand where you started and where you got to. So we have all of these initial codes, and for the most part, they all ended up going into the final categories. So importance of field trips, we have a whole code on field trip right here, and that's pretty much it. That whole code went straight to a final category. The idea of freedom, though, had a lot of categories. So passion and love was part of that. Freedom over here was part of that. Commitment was part of self-improvement, along with teaching and learning. So thinking about how the students taught and learned from each other was part of self-improvement. Friendship over here had something to do with storytelling and this friend and banter. So we can see some of these initial codes and how we got to the final categories. And then from these 6, we took a step back and said, these are really 2 ideas, internal motivation and external motivation. Here's another example. So here I was trying to understand how teachers defined data. So just when I said, what does data mean to you? How are they talking about it? And the main thing you can see by all the excerpts, the main way that they talked about it was the idea of information. So literally using the word information or giving evidence or information or understanding where a kid is at, a reading of kids, an assessment of kids. So the concept of information right over here. They also talked about it in the way of numbers, which is also not super surprising. Literally saying the word numbers or saying how many did they get right out of 10. But beyond just talking about it as the static thing, they actually talked about it as more of a tangible thing. So a gauge. How they're doing. Do they understand concepts to gauge where your students are at? Where do they need to go? A tool. And even more so, they talked about it using active language. So it's something that you do something with, anything that can be used, a way to separate, what I can do to move them ahead. So these would be my categories, or even just my codes, and I would be using these to answer my question, trying to understand the meaning of data. Here's another example. So I have two main categories of having a tool or needing a tool, and then I included a case in point. So these would be my exemplar quotes. I call this thing magic tool, and you can see that coming directly from the data right here. But the teachers kept talking about having tools that they used for data analysis. Specifically, sure, there are tools out there, but do you really have the passion for data to make it happen, to like really use a tool or find a tool? Two of them mentioned Schoology, which is a tool that their district was using where they put in their own data and it broke it down for them. Another person was talking about a different program that was not very user-friendly, slow to update all the progress monitoring, so it was harder to use. Then they also talked about needing a tool, so looking for a user-friendly data access programs, finding ways to gather more data out of the assessments that I provide. It'd be nice to have new tools to break down a standard. And then we have the case in point. Specifically, here's the example where I left in explicit language because it showed the passion and the frustration of this teacher. So it's not that I don't know how to use data, but nobody's holding me accountable for it. And right now I have too many fucking things going on in my life to figure something else out. No one's handing me a magic tool, right? And another case in point, another example. But unless somebody hands that to me on a platter, I'm not going to do it. Here's the other thing I want you to see, kind of the behind the scenes of how I even got to this point. So if we look at just the red is a code on the concept of a tool. And you can see they're talking about tool, program, tools, programs, tools, magic tools. The green is talking about the idea of time. Like, how am I going to make that happen? It's so slow. It's taking the time to do it. I have too many things going on. And then blue is really talking about what do they want out of a tool. So they want it to be accessible, user-friendly, good, user-friendly, handed to them on a platter. So that's kind of how you can start to take your different codes and group them into these bigger ideas. And then, of course, having the exemplars to really show in their words what is happening. These are themes. Developing themes. There's a whole handout on this that you're going to do with your team. But in general, you're just looking and looking and looking and reading and reading and reading all of your codes. So you're looking for categories and things that just seem to keep going together. You can look at all of the charts in Deduce, looking at weightings and occurrence and patterns among codes to see how things are grouping together. What are the things that seem to be the most important? Do some relate to another? Do some people seem to prioritize certain ideas? Really taking a step back, looking at everything that you have so far and how are you going to answer your research question by examining the big takeaways from your analysis. That's going to really help you with the identification of a theme. Like, what are these big ideas, like the big takeaways from what you kept seeing? And don't forget, you have to supply specific evidence, actual excerpts to back up your claims. It's kind of like a persuasive argument of here's what I found and here's the evidence for that. This person said this, and this person said this, and this person said this. And here's how that goes into this code, which led to my theme. So let's start organizing and brainstorming. Look at your research questions. Take a step back. What are the major findings from your codes? We did this when we talked about each individual code, and now we're going to do a very similar thing for each individual theme. So first of all, name it. That could be a whole sentence. Usually it's another phrase. And then write a 1 to 2 paragraph overview describing what this theme means and how the codes or categories, like which of those would go under this and why. And then, of course, you're going to have your exemplar quotes. And I do highly recommend at this stage to start to think about the connection to literature and real life application. You would talk about those two more in a discussion section, but while you're planning everything out and doing your brainstorming, I would just have a whole bullet point for that as you are able. So speaking of writing, here's a general outline of how you're going to do this. So you're going to start with a main heading that is your theme name. And under that, you're going to provide that overview of the theme and what categories and codes go under it. Then break down each category or code meaning with the subheading. Under that subheading, talk about the category meaning and the connection to the theme. Don't just give me a list of codes. How do the codes connect to the larger theme? You're going to have exemplar quotes woven in here, and specifically unpack each quote. So don't give me a bullet point list of quotes, and definitely do not end a section with a quote. Not helpful. Give the quote and then really tell me, how does that quote exemplify the category and the theme? Explain that connection. Do not assume the reader can see it. Say, so-and-so said this, which shows this. All right, so let's start planning out our writing.